Welcome to the deep dive. You've given us quite the document to tackle. The Auditor General's report on government spending for 2023-2024.
It is hefty, yes.
Our goal today, to cut through all the official language and pull out the really surprising stuff, the findings that make you sit up and take notice about how public money is being handled.
Exactly. Think of it as your shortcut to the key takeaways.
And this report, its main purpose, as stated right at the start, is all about accountability, isn't it? Making sure there's oversight on public resources.
That's the core idea. Across the board, executive, legislature, judiciary, constitutional bodies, it checks if spending follows the law, if money's used effectively, and looks at the internal controls, the whole governance setup.
So basically a big financial health check for the government.
You could put it that way, yes. A very detailed one.
And the results of this checkup? Well, let's just say there are some findings that are quite shocking. We're diving in to unpack the most significant ones.
Agreed. There's a lot to cover.
Okay, where should we start? How about something fundamental, like government debt and borrowing? That seems like a good place.
Definitely. The report flags a major deviation from the planned borrowing strategy for 2023. The idea was a 50-50 mix, external and domestic borrowing.
Right. A balanced approach.
But what actually happened was heavily skewed towards domestic borrowing. The ratio ended up being about 27.73.
27 external, 73 domestic. That's a big shift.
It is. And what's, well, notable is that the report says there's no documented approval for this change in strategy.
So they just changed course without signing off on it officially.
That appears to be the finding. It raises questions about, sticking to the plan and the decision-making process.
And didn't the strategy also talk about prioritizing concessional loans, the cheaper ones?
It did. Maximize concessional borrowing. That was the aim. But the reality, out of 14 new loans signed that year, 13 were commercial.
13 out of 14. Wow. So almost entirely the potentially more expensive type of debt.
That's what the numbers show. Commercial loans usually mean higher interest, maybe tougher repayment terms.
Which could put more pressure on finances later on, right?
Precisely. It makes you wonder why the shift away from the concessional focus was so drastic. Was it necessity? Lack of availability? The report doesn't detail the why, but flags the deviation.
Okay, speaking of specific debts, that Kenya Airways loan figure is quite something.
Yes, the KQ loan. Over 55 billion shillings outstanding as of June 2023. That's a huge number.
And part of that was money the government had to pay out directly, wasn't it? Because KQ defaulted.
Exactly. Over 7.8 billion shillings. It was a government-guaranteed loan KQ couldn't pay, so the government had to step in.
Under Article 223 of the Constitution, the report mentions.
Yes, that allows for urgent, unforeseen expenditure. But using it to cover a default on a guaranteed loan, well, it highlights the risk the government takes on with these guarantees.
It's taxpayer money ultimately covering that default.
It is. And it wasn't a planned budget item, obviously. It shows the financial vulnerability there.
A stark reminder, definitely. Okay, let's move on. The report also talks a lot about what it terms avoidable expenditures, often linked to project delays.
Yes, this is a recurring theme. Commitment fees, specifically. Money paid on loans because the funds weren't drawn down and used quickly enough.
Commitment fees. So like a penalty for not borrowing fast enough, even though we've secured the loan?
Essentially, yes. Fees charged on the undrawn balance. The total mentioned is significant, over 1.58 billion shillings.
1.58 billion, just in these fees. Ouch.
And the Auditor General flags this as potentially avoidable.
Meaning if the projects had just run on time.
Exactly. If projects were implemented efficiently, funds absorbed as planned, these fees wouldn't have accumulated to this level, or perhaps at all. It points towards inefficiency in project execution.
Are there specific examples given?
Oh, yes, quite a few. There's a Bill Num 3 sewage works, only 39% paid out by November 2023. Another one, Bill Num 6 sewer connections, even lower, just 14% paid.
14%, that's incredibly low.
And worse, the report notes that some sewer lines for Bill 6 were partly done but not connected, or held up because of issues like power lines being in the way.
So pipes in the ground, but leading nowhere, basically, despite a 5-year project plan.
That seems to be the situation described. It really points to issues in planning, coordination, and execution. And it's not just these smaller bills.
No. What else?
The Bagamoyo Horo Phase 1 project, a major water and sanitation project, EUR 108 million financing, agreed in 2020.
Okay, that sounds crucial. Water and sanitation.
Absolutely.
Right.
But it's faced significant delays, which means people in the target areas, Mombasa and Kwale counties potentially aren't getting these vital services on time.
And I assume commitment fees were involved there too.
Yes, over 12.4 million shillings in commitment fees mentioned, directly linked to the implementation delays on that project.
It feels like a pattern. Delay leads to fees, and crucially, delay means people don't get the services.
That's the double impact. Wasted money on fees, and the project objectives aren't met when needed.
You'd think with all this borrowing for projects, there'd be close monitoring of how well they're progressing.
You would hope so. But the report points out a lack of comprehensive analysis on the completion rates of these debt-funded projects by the National Treasury.
Really. They aren't tracking completion properly.
The analysis required by the Public Debt and Borrowing Policy 2020, which should identify delays and recommend fixes, wasn't consistently done, according to the report.
So how can they manage effectively if they don't have that clear picture?
It makes it very difficult. You can't easily identify which projects are struggling or reallocate resources effectively without that ongoing analysis. It hinders proper oversight.
Okay, let's shift from spending to collecting. What about revenue? Any shocking figures there?
Oh, definitely. Non-tax revenue arrears from government investment and public enterprises, GPEs. The figure is, frankly, staggering.
How staggering.
Over 405 billion shillings owed to the government, but uncollected.
405 billion. That's a huge amount of money.
It is. And a significant chunk of that relates to loan repayments and interest owed by these government entities to the government. Over 74 billion in loan redemption and 49 billion in interest, much of it outstanding for over 3 years.
So government entities owe the main government massive amounts and haven't paid for years.
That's what the report indicates. It raises serious questions about financial discipline within these GIPEs and the effectiveness of collection mechanisms. That's money that should be funding public services.
Absolutely. Okay, switching tracks again, financial systems themselves. The report mentions something about the Piece-of-Flow payment system.
Yes, a concern about the lack of a separate testing environment.
What does that mean, practically speaking? Why is it risky?
Well, think of it like this. When you update critical software, like a major payment system, you usually test the changes in a safe sandbox environment first to catch bugs or security issues before they affect the live system handling real money and data.
Right, makes sense, like a dress rehearsal.
Exactly. Without that separate testing space, any updates or changes go straight into the live system. That increases the risk of, well, things going wrong, glitches, errors, even potential security holes affecting government payments.
That sounds not ideal for a critical system.
It's certainly flagged as a risk to safeguarding government information and ensuring smooth operations.
And there were other system-related issues too, agreements with service providers.
Yes, a couple of things. Lack of signed service-level agreements, SLAs, with some payment service providers. These SLAs are important because they define expectations, responsibilities, service standards.
So without them, it's a bit unclear who's responsible for what if things go wrong.
Potentially, yes. Less clarity, less accountability, and also the agreement with Safaricom for co-location and support of the e-citizen platform had apparently lapsed.
The main e-citizen platform, that's pretty central to a lot of government services now.
It is. A lapse agreement raises questions about the ongoing formal support and maintenance arrangements for such a vital piece of digital infrastructure.
Okay, let's talk about people. Pensions and payroll. Were there issues there?
Yes, some worrying findings. Incomplete pension records were highlighted, missing ID numbers, even DMI employee numbers being used in a payroll system that handles, over 118 billion shillings annually.
Dummy numbers, missing IDs. That sounds like a recipe for errors or worse.
It creates significant risks. Risk of incorrect payments, risk of fraud, difficulty in verifying pensioner details. It points to weaknesses in data management within the pension system.
And did this affect actual payments?
The report also mentions delays in pension payments. This is particularly concerning because pensioners are often vulnerable and rely heavily on these timely payments for their livelihood.
Yeah, delays there can cause real hardship.
Absolutely. It suggests systemic problems in the administration process, from record keeping to disbursement.
So we've covered debt, avoidable costs, revenue collection, systems, payroll. The report seems to touch on almost everything.
It's incredibly comprehensive. And beyond these broad categories, there's just a long, long list of specific project failures and oversight issues across different ministries and departments.
Like what? Give us a few examples of this lack of effective implementation.
Well, take the Infrastructure Finance Public-Private Partnerships Project, IFPPP. It ran for 7 years aiming to boost private investment in PPPs. The finding: it didn't achieve that objective by June 2024. 7 years, and the core goal wasn't met.
7 years is a long time for a project not to deliver on its main aim.
Indeed. Then there's the Climate Action Program, financing locally led climate action. Over 228 million shillings was sent to 3 counties. It was in Gishu, Busia, Homa Bay.
Okay, for local climate projects.
Yes, but the issue: those counties apparently didn't submit the required audit reports for those funds.
We don't actually know how that money was spent, or if it was spent on climate action at all.
The accountability loop is broken without those reports. It's impossible to verify proper usage. This lack of reporting from receiving entities is a recurring theme.
What else stood out in this long list?
Expired contracts. Goods worth hundreds of millions procured, contracts expired, but deliveries still outstanding.
So we paid, or agreed to pay, but didn't get the goods, and the contract deadline passed.
That's the picture painted. Weak contract management, lack of follow-up. It delays projects and risks financial loss.
Any other particularly unusual findings?
How about unsupported air travel expenditure? Over 1.6 million shillings spent on flights, but the auditors couldn't find basic documentation. No participant lists, no proof of attendance, no reports on what the travel achieved.
Just flight tickets with no backup.
Essentially, yes. A complete lack of supporting documents to justify the spending raises serious questions about prudence.
That's quite blatant.
And then there's a financing agreement for a summit, apparently signed after the summit had already happened.
Sign the funding agreement after the event. How does that work?
It's highly irregular, and on top of that, USD 3 million, about 475 million shillings, was dispersed, but the report says the eligibility criteria for spending that money were unclear.
So, money handed out after the fact, with fuzzy rules. That sounds like a major red flag for potential misuse.
It certainly does. It undermines the whole purpose of having agreements and controls in place beforehand.
The report also mentioned projects being delayed, but the government not claiming damages from contractors.
Yes, liquidated damages clauses in contracts are meant to compensate for delays. But the report notes instances, like a construction project stuck at 70% completion despite an extension, where these damages weren't being demanded from the contractor.
Why wouldn't they? Isn't that leaving money on the table and letting contractors off the hook?
It suggests a potential lack of enforcement of contractual terms, which means delays might continue without financial consequences for the contractor, ultimately costing the public more.
And actual abandoned projects.
Several mentions. Plumbing works at Thika Prison, apparently left unfinished despite ongoing flooding issues. A whole new prison block at Thika Women Prison stalled at 40% completion since 2011.
Since 2011. That's over a decade.
A very long time. Represents significant sunk costs and, in the prison's case, potential impacts on living conditions and safety.
What about basic administration, land ownership, planning?
Issues there, too. Kisumu Medium Prison reportedly lacks title deeds for its land, leading to encroachment problems.
Building on land they don't formally own.
Or at least can't formally prove ownership of easily. Creates huge vulnerabilities. And the State Department for Interior and National Administration apparently operated for over a year into its planning cycle without an approved strategic plan.
No strategic plan for a whole year. How did they prioritize or allocate resources?
It raises exactly those questions. It's like sailing without a map. Hard to be effective or efficient.
This list just keeps going. Unaccounted payments, insurance anomalies.
Yes, an unaccounted for KSHS .200 million payment to an insurance company. Issues with the National Police Service Group Life cover contract discrepancies and numbers covered, records not submitted. Elevator maintenance contracts where there might have been overlapping payments, suggesting lack of value for money.
And the delays in processing injury claims, some going back to 2003.
Yes, incredibly long delays impacting police officers and other public servants waiting for work injury or accident compensation. That's a failure in duty of care.
It's just, the sheer volume and variety is overwhelming. Lack of land documents for thousands of parcels, unsupported financial adjustments. Consultants paid millions for data centers never delivered.
Discrepancies in bank balances for missions abroad, delays in sending them funds, which affects operations and potentially the country's image. Dilapidated embassy buildings in places like Berlin, lack of insurance.
Irregular recruitment practices violating HR policies. Low absorption of funds in vocational training projects. Buying laptops at inflated prices without proper planning.
Unconfirmed school capitation figures because student data wasn't verified. Low loan uptake for primary education projects. Contracts signed without notifying the procurement authority. Shoddy construction work on infrastructure projects.
Unsupported grants to learners. Government departments not meeting the 5% disability employment target. COVID vaccine orders paid for, but only a fraction delivered. Hospitals not claiming millions owed by NHIF.
Employee costs exceeding the recommended 35% threshold. Avoidable interest paid on delayed road project payments. Projects ending years ago with no closure report and undrawn loan balances. Project vehicles irregularly transferred to contractors.
Paying land compensation to people encroaching on road reserves. Unclear contract terms for consultants. Unsupported prior year adjustments. Paying retention money from the wrong account. Government funding for projects being delayed.
More commitment fees on undrawn loans. Huge budget underfunding. Government warehouses seemingly without lease documents. Solar equipment paid for but not working or not installed. Asset registers missing vehicles or having wrong values. No risk management policy. Stolen vehicles.
Unreconciled bank balances in donor projects. More avoidable interest on delayed dam payments. Boreholes drilled at great expense yielding no water. Abandoned ablution blocks. Delayed water supply works.
Unsupported bank balances in water programs. More avoidable interest to consultants. Massive commitment charges on water loans due to delays. Inaccurate financial statements. Delays compensating people affected by water projects. Non-compliance with procurement. Huge pending bills, some years old.
Budgetary issues in water funds, unsupported payments, non-compliance with accounting standards, unresolved damages against the ICT authority, low loan use for ICT projects, no risk policy for agriculture projects, value for money questioned on bulk fuel purchases.
Mixing project funds improperly. Borrowing without approval. Not using separate project bank accounts. Misstated Whaley figures. Transmission lines delayed despite funds being used. Financial statement omissions. Changing contract terms after funding lapsed. Billions idle in non-interest-bearing accounts.
Procurement delays causing cancellations, misallocating funds, no registers for work in progress, no status report on fixing previous audit issues, delayed exchequer releases, staff acting in roles too long without pay, poor workmanship, delayed commissioning of facilities, unsupported use of provisional sums.
Shared bank accounts, unconfirmed payables, lack of land titles, value for money questioned on construction, penalties paid for delays, farmers not compensated under insurance schemes despite premiums paid, buying from unregistered suppliers, not notifying unsuccessful bidders, buying seedlings irregularly, maize dryers underused or broken, inadequate waste disposal at pesticide stores, strategic objectives missed, rundown sale yards, incomplete irrigation schemes, project bank accounts left open, spending on non-operational refineries, more missing risk policies, unconfirmed project unit changes, low implementation of climate-smart agriculture, delays in youth training, equipment undelivered, honey equipment delivered but unused, pasture facilities delayed, defective works in sale yards, defective labs handed over.
Paying rent when government space is free, budget overruns, delays procuring services, beneficiaries unpaid in safety net programs, unsupported reversals, free lab services impacting revenue, mineral rights granted in protected areas, stalled Monanchi gas project with unused cylinders.
Understaffing in mining, delayed conservancy plans, lack of audit committees, poor succession planning, not meeting disability employment laws again, unconfirmed rental expenditure, failing to validate disability allowances, ineffective ICT support, variances in state law office accounts,
Variances between different financial systems, failure to open offices in marginalized areas, aged beneficiary records at legal aid, understaffing at public trustee, huge unsupported increase in judiciary staff numbers, unconfirmed controls over security spending, mortgage repayment variances, lack of project steering meetings.
low fund absorption in judicial projects, IEBC failing to register new voters or update the register, massive vacancies at IEBC leading to casuals in sensitive roles, unconfirmed control over voter registration kits, lack of segregation of duties, no comprehensive asset register at IEBC, fire risks in SOARs, ancient receivables, unrecovered court costs.
Lack of asset register at Parliament, no title deeds for Parliament buildings, unconfirmed spending regularity, weak controls on senator mileage, delayed IT system at Parliament, delayed construction, unfavorable terms for staff loans hindering access, no governing regulations for the loan fund, incomplete asset register at a water authority. It's a lot.
It is an overwhelming list when you lay it out. It paints a picture of systemic weaknesses across many areas: financial management, project implementation, procurement, contract management, internal controls, basic record keeping.
So the learner, as you take all this in,
Yeah.
what's the big picture? What does this comprehensive report really tell us?
I think it underscores significant challenges in ensuring accountability, efficiency, and effectiveness in the use of public resources. The scale and variety of the issues, from high-level debt strategy deviations down to basic failures like missing receipts or undelivered goods, is quite striking.
It really makes you think about the impact on actual service delivery and whether taxpayers are getting value for money.
Absolutely. And the key questions that arise are, what are the root causes? Is it capacity? Is it systems? Is it enforcement? And crucially, what concrete actions are being taken or need to be taken to address these recurring issues?
These are definitely questions worth pondering long after this deep dive ends. It highlights the importance of this kind of scrutiny, doesn't it?
It does. Continuous oversight and public engagement with these findings are vital for driving improvements in public financial management.
Well, thank you for helping us navigate through these, frankly, quite shocking findings. We hope this gives you, the learner, a clearer understanding of the key issues raised by the Auditor General. Keep questioning, keep seeking accountability. Thanks for joining us.